Geeks and geekettes, gats and kittens, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Time once again for Ask Chuck Dixon, where you ask me, a seasoned professional of many, many years of experience in the comic book field, questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. So let's get right to the first question. Robert Dungato says, how do you find Jean Jro Mobius's work as an artist and as EGAD's author? Well, I'm a much bigger fan of Mobius, Jean Giro, um, as an artist than a writer. And I can say that because I can't really remember anything about any of the stories that he wrote. I just remember the visuals. Now, if you don't know who Mobius or Jean Giro is, he's a French artist who basically owned the 70s and the 80s in the European comic art scene. He worked on the movie Aliens doing design work. And as you can see, if you're watching this rather than listening, he was a man of incredible levels of talent and a boundless imagination. A lot of the way he visualizes or visualized science fiction elements and things like that under the name Mobius, huge impact on the visuals of science fiction, how science fiction looks going forward from his work. But obviously, if you're looking at this, incredible draftsman, unlimited imagination, a real visionary as far as comic book work, and I'd say illustration as well, because so much of the stuff he does is illustration rather than comics. And he worked in my most favorite genre, the Western, doing a long series called Lieutenant Blueberry, which is what put him on the map under his real name, Jean Giro. And Lieutenant Blueberry was a Union cavalry officer in the Southwest in the middle of the Indian Wars with the Apache and the Comanche and the Yaqui Indians. And it's a terrific series. As you can see here, beautifully researched, beautifully realized. He had a real passion for Western culture, Western history, as so many Europeans do. And this series was extraordinarily successful for its publishers across Europe in many, many languages. And of course, it was reprinted here in the United States, but to nowhere near the degree of success that Lieutenant Blueberry has had overseas. So yeah, as an artist, he's unparalleled as a comic book artist. As a writer, the pictures are really, really pretty. Hey, twin spin for Robert. Could you explain from your perception as a veteran what you think happened with Harley Quinn and how she seems to be more ubiquitous to DC than Alfred E. Newman to Mad? Yeah, she's kind of become the Wolverine of DC. She's one of the few characters who can move a book. I don't know if that's still true, but she's one of the few characters who, up until recently, could move a book. And so, just as they have many, many more Batman titles than almost anything else at DC, because Batman can also still manage to sell some issues, they also give a lot of space to Harley Quinn. And that's comics. It's redundant publishing. What sells, you make more of. What doesn't, you cancel. So yeah, they kind of rely real heavily. And of course, it's a law of diminishing returns. Characters reach saturation rather rapidly. And, take a look at The Punisher. And, how much longer will they be able to sell Harley Quinn projects? But there are obviously Harley Quinn completists, collectors. So as long as they keep bringing out number ones and variants and statues and action figures and T-shirts and posters and other tchotchkes, they'll still be making a lot of money off of Harley Quinn. I had something else to say about this, and I can't remember what it was, but maybe it's not important. Yeah. Oh, yes. To me, it struck me a few months ago the obvious appeal. Why is Harley Quinn so popular? she's popular for the same reason at DC that Deadpool is popular at Marvel. These are characters who basically they're stand-ins for the comic book fans. They stand outside the action and they comment on it. They break the fourth wall. They're observers often, as well as participants, and their wry little comments and things are often quoted and repeated at conventions and comic book shops. So these characters are tailor-made for comic nerds to relate to, and therefore that is the reason they're popular. They are like Groucho Marx. They are standing outside the action, commenting on it, speaking for us, and there's not to say anything wrong with that. I can see the appeal. All right, David T. Zwali. Hey, Chuck, have you ever thought about doing a run of Agents of Thunder? If so, where would you take the group? Actually, Thunder Agents, it's a series of comics that sort of sprouted up out of nowhere in the mid-'60s when there was a brief superhero craze in pop culture. And everybody was doing superheroes. Paperback companies were reprinting superhero comics. Archie returned to doing superheroes. And Thunder Agents kind of cropped up out of nowhere. A comic book company associated with Tower Books, a paperback publisher, sort of Poverty Row paperback publisher, and largely left in the hands of Wally Wood, people in his studio to create these books. Bill Pearson writing, Wally Wood writing, Dan Adkins, Steve Ditko contributed to this, Gil Kane, lots of the top artists at the time, Al Williamson, Reed Crandall, all contributed something to Thunder Agents. Apparently at the beginning, the page rates were hot, so everybody wanted in. And it's always been a fun series. It's unapologetic, straight up superhero action combined with espionage in order to take advantage of the spy craze that was going on at the time. And would I be interested? Yeah, I read all these. I loved them when I was a kid. And every once in a while, crack open my hardcover collections of these and take a peek at them because the art's all gorgeous and they're fun reads. And there's some depth to the universe. It's pretty much meat and potatoes. It's aliens. It's evil globalist crime organizations. It's creatures from the center of the earth. Things like that. High concept sci-fi. Fighting and kicking and gouging and all the rest of it. But it's good stuff. It's high adventure, good stuff. I really enjoy it. And a sense of humor. There's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek here, which makes it even more fun. And I almost wrote a Thunder Agents limited series at IDW. It was, I was asked to pitch, and I pitched a series that involved the creatures from the center of the earth. I forget what the character was called. It was Overlord or Big Man, or I don't know what, I can't remember. And a lot of the action centered around Andro, which was like a replicant creation, who was a real badass in Thunder Ages. He was a villain, but kind of an anti-hero. And the character fascinated me when I was a kid. He was brutal. And largely Thunder Agents was kind of a douse of cold water on a lot of superhero stuff because it was one of the first in the modern age, in the Silver Age, to deal with, the death of a character. They killed off one of their characters and he stayed dead, and he was really dead. And what I loved about it when I was a kid was he dies, which was shocking, absolutely shocking to me, that a masked superhero character could be killed. But even more shocking is the reaction of the other Thunder Agents. They basically massacred the bad guys to a man. It was like, when I was a kid, I just thought that was so cool. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of appeal here for me. If the opportunity ever arose and the stars were aligned and the deal was right, yeah, I would say yes. Martin Bowe, who is your favorite comedian? It's not even a contest with me. Jonathan Winters, I think, is the funniest guy who ever lived. I know he doesn't look very funny in this picture, but Jonathan Winters, when I was a kid, would crack me up, still cracks me up to this day. I still listen. I have a collection of his comedy albums that I still listen to. And he was largely improv and would make stuff up. And the poor guy, I mean, back when he was hot as a pistol, on appearing on late night TV, and doing clubs and all the rest of it. The poor guy had a nervous breakdown because of the pressures of his act. His act was that he would just kind of wing it. He would, he wouldn't come up with like a solid 45-minute routine. He would just sort of come up with some vague concepts in his head and just sort of go with it and engage audience reaction to how they were reacting to things to figure out what he was going to do next. And he would often do bits, which really is a high wire act of comedy, where he would tell the audience to shout things out. And then he would riff on whatever it is they shouted out. And that's some of his funniest material. But the pressures got to this guy and he cracked up. And I remember I was a kid. I was a little kid, a real little kid. But I loved Jonathan Winters so much, and my parents knew it, that they would, if he was going to be on, like Jack Parr, the original Tonight Show, if he was going to be on, they would I would go to bed early and they would wake me up so I could see Jonathan Winters. And I vividly recall, I couldn't have been more than 6 years old. This guy cracked me up. I couldn't have been more than 6 years old. And it was the Friday show, and they're going down the couch. You know how they used to do on the talk shows, go down the couch, where are you? And basically everybody on the couch would say where they were appearing or where their new movie was premiering. And Winters is the last one on the couch. And we're hearing, I'll be in Vegas from, November 9th through the 15th. My movie comes out this weekend. Please go see it. And they get to Jonathan Winters, and Parr says, so what are you doing this weekend, Johnny? And Winters says, I think I'm going to go get locked up in a sanitarium. It got a huge laugh, except it was true. He committed himself the following day and went to a mental institution. And the thing that got him out of it wasn't psychiatric care. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't anything else. It was his wife. His wife explained to him when he was well enough to come home. She said, you do what you do. This is what you do. This is what God put you on the planet to do. Make people laugh. And the way you make them laugh is you just make stuff up out of your crazy mind on the fly. And that's what you do. And some nights it's not going to work. But most nights it will. And you have to have faith in that. And that turned everything around for him. And he made his comeback, and he was popular throughout his life. Appearing on television, doing clubs, doing tours, writing books, doing narration, doing all kinds of things. Jonathan Winters was beloved and hugely popular throughout his career into his senior years, and all because that fear of failure, his wife kind of took it away from him. Said, "Don't worry about it. That's going to happen." And generally it didn't. And like I said, one of the funniest guy that ever lived, in my opinion. Hey, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you have already subscribed, thank you very much. You're helping to build this channel. And I will move on. The next question. Matthew Rex, what did you think of Frank Frazetta as a comic book artist? Well, we think of Frazetta as an illustrator, and a painter and all the rest of it. And a lot of people forget or don't know that he was a comic book artist. He's an extraordinarily slow comic book artist, so he really couldn't make a good living at it. He would, anybody who talked to Al Williamson, who's a very, very close friend of Frank Frazetta's, will tell you that they would, they get tired of working and just leave the studio and go play a game of softball in the park instead of working, which editors did not appreciate. But they kept hiring them because, look, the artwork's freaking gorgeous. So yeah, you wanted Frazetta on your team, but you didn't always know that you were going to get the stuff in on time. But as a comic book artist, I mean, he was good. Obviously very illustrative, much like Mobius, who we discussed earlier. Very much an illustration thing, but but he had the chops for comics. He understood storytelling, even when given the opportunity, a highly cinematic storytelling. This is a very early, very early. He was only in his 20s when he drew and inked this as a sample page of what he could do in comics. And the unfortunate thing is he was never given the level of material to match what he was bringing to it. And I think he realized that early on, and eventually left comic books, which weren't paying him enough because he wasn't prolific enough. And he went to the world of comic strips. He did his own comic strip, Johnny Comet, but for years assisted in inking on Little Abner, for which I assume he was highly paid because he stayed there for quite a while, but realized he wasn't growing as an artist, and he left to take a swing at painting. And we all know what happened then. So he became an icon. He became, this legend, deservedly so. Frank Frazetta, incredibly talented, but yeah, he's a very, very good comic book artist. Probably too good for comics. But that said, even though he was terrific at the illustration and his drawings were lush and everything else, he knew how to tell a story. He knew how to lay out a page. He understood the medium. John Papa, how much do you think the rise of crowdfunding has contributed to the seemingly imminent end of the direct market? I don't think crowdfunding is taking away sales from the direct market. I think it's serving the audience, the ready audience, the underserved audience that has left the direct market. They don't buy comics anymore because they don't see anything in the comic shop they like, unless they go in to look for back issues or collections. But largely, they're not buying monthly comics anymore. They're not following series the way they used to. And so crowdfunders have come in to that vacuum, and we're creating stuff for that audience. I say we. I'm not a crowdfunder. I don't have my own company, but I certainly associate with all of these guys, and I certainly have done work at one time or another not for Mr. Van Sciver yet, but we've talked. So this is the alternative. This grew. I mean, the crowdfunded comics grew out of, number one, unemployed comic book creators who still wanted to do comics. They weren't ready to go be Walmart greeters. Number two, there was money to be made. And number three, they didn't like what was going on in comics, so they wanted to offer an alternative. And a lot of times this is seen as some sort of political move or something. It really isn't a political move. Is it a coincidence that a lot of the successful crowdfunding creators are conservative rather than left-wing? No, I don't think that's a coincidence, because they're conservatives. They're business first. They're about results. These are the people that meet deadlines. They're taking the medium seriously, working hard, because crowdfunding is hard work. People complain about sometimes about the price points, which I don't think they should, because if you support a successful crowdfunder, you're buying what you wanted, generally the equivalent of a trade paperback. By the time it gets to you, that box is crammed with stickers, T-shirts, bumper stickers, action figures, whatever, all kinds of tchotchkes that were added on as the campaign becomes. So as the campaign becomes more successful, you reap the rewards as well, and you end up with a low print run comic that is, by its very nature, a rarity. Except in the case of the Rippaverse, where the numbers are so big. Those books are I hate to spoil the collector aftermarket for Rippaverse books, but there's a lot of them out there. I mean, Eric is doing serious numbers here, and it leaves the creators freewheeling to do all kinds of crazy stuff, and it gives them an independence they've never had, even in the independent comic market, and especially not working for the big two. And now, because it's like an established thing and these guys have really made a place for themselves in the market, there's also security for them. But has any of this hurt the direct market? No, the direct market shot itself in the head. The Marvel, DC, and Diamond went into a suicide pact and jumped off a cliff together. They put all of their money, all of their time, all of their interest in comic shops, as opposed to newsstand or book trade or any of the other areas that were lucrative to them. This is a huge error. And the numbers support me because I was getting royalty checks in the 90s as this shift was happening away from the newsstand into the direct market. And let me tell you, my royalty checks got smaller and smaller and smaller. The numbers I was able to see the numbers sold of each copy of each thing I was working on. They were shrinking, undeniably. And it was only going one way. And it wasn't just me, it was everybody, because we weren't on the newsstand anymore. The majority of my sales were on the newsstand. As DC and Marvel withdrew from the newsstand, sales shrank. Well, that means less money. And then you're relying on basically, for the most part, a bunch of independent retailers, independent businessmen. And if you know anything about small business, they're all risky. Things can change. And guys can retire, lose interest. So there's a lot of reasons a comic shop would go out of business. And lots of them have over the years. There's been ups and downs. But a lot of, this isn't the first time we've seen a lot of comic book shops closing. Mid 90s, thousands of them closed. And then we're seeing a repeat of that now, but I don't see any way back because neither DC or Marvel are doing anything to fix it. And really, yeah, you can talk about Dark Horse and Boom and all the rest, but it's DC and Marvel run the show in the direct market. If they do well, everyone does well. And no one's doing well. And that's because they're not turning that ship around. They've seriously got to start thinking about the comic book audience, finding new readers, bringing back old readers, and make a real conscious effort to market these things. But it's never going to happen because at this point, their parent companies aren't going to sink any money into a marketing campaign to promote comic books. That's never going to happen. So unless some enormously huge talent emerges out of the blue, and some fantastic new character is created to capture the imagination of a new generation of readers, we're looking at the slow death of the direct market. And crowdfunders is just a byproduct of that. John Papa again. How much do you think publishers not doing the work of publishers, no upfront page rates, limited skill, attempts at marketing, clinging to outdated and irrelevant IPs instead of developing new properties, having contributed to the same cycle? Well, yeah, like I said, it's the fault of the publishers, who fell into this trap and got kind of lazy. We got this direct market; they can't return them. We can snake oil them into buying, some crappy maxi series or crossover or whatever that we're just gonna, poop out for them. And they got lazy. And as far as marketing, like I said, comics have never marketed themselves. They didn't even. I remember in the 90s when there was a downturn in sales, DC fired 2 of their marketing guys and hired a cover editor. Now, no one bought a comic book based on its cover in 20 years at that point. Covers used to be important because they'd be on the newsstand, had to grab your eye. That the latest issue of Spider-Man had to stick out somehow from the pack, make you take a second look at it. But direct market, people they had subscriptions at their comic shop, pre-orders, all the rest of it. Covers were less and less important. And to fire 2 marketing guys in the middle of a serious sales slump seems kind of crazy to me. But then again, what were those marketing guys doing? It's not like the company had a plan to bring up sales, because they never do. Comics are something that the money has always found the comics. The comics have never gone out and found the money. Wolverine's popular. Whoa, who knew? We got to do more of this guy. You know, why did this comic sell and this one didn't? You know, yeah, let's do more of that. So it's, you know, and then bringing in new readers. They've made no effort. Vertigo was the last attempt to bring in new comic book readers. You know, they aimed themselves at, you know, like college freshmen who were philosophy majors who just had their first beer, and that was their core readership, and it worked. It worked. I mean, Vertigo wasn't for me. I didn't care for a lot of stuff they did, but that doesn't matter. They were good comics. They were well produced. They were, you know, passionately produced by people who really like doing comics. I have no fault with the level of, you know, professionalism that, you know, Vertigo comics look great. You know, why? Of course, they found an audience. That was really the last time they ever tried to find a new audience. And of course, that audience was older. There's never been an effort to find a kids audience again, to appeal to kids, except a few, you know, efforts at pandering here and there. But until they bring them back, until you not bring them back, they're gone now. But until you do something to interest a new generation of kids, because we've skipped 2 generations, and particularly interest girls into buying the comics, because girls used to drive the comic market. Until that happens, nothing's going to happen. But I don't see anything being done in that area. You don't see anything being done in that area. There's no outreach. If anything, they're working harder to chase readers away than to gain readers, which is, you know, that's a really foolish business plan. Jerome Maida, is there anything, change of ownership, that could get you to write for Marvel or DC again? Yeah, it's not like I wouldn't pick up the phone. I have no animus against DC and Marvel. It's not up to me. You know, I'm not going to call them, certainly. I'm not going to pitch to them. But they know where I am. They know where to find me. If they wanted me to come back and work on comics at either Marvel or DC, I would. But that ain't happening. And I mean, even back when I was in what I call my wilderness years, where I left CrossGen and I couldn't get arrested at DC and Marvel, so I found alternate means of income. Thank you, Bongo. Thank you to The Simpsons for giving me a lot of work. And I worked on other things too. Dark Horse had me do a Star Wars thing. You know, so I was still getting work, but not quite as much as I was used to. I had no monthly. And I was told by someone who, up until that moment, I trusted, that if I was to go back to Marvel and apologize, I would get to work there again. And my question was, apologize for what? I was like, apologize for your political views. He's like, you know, so I'm to apologize who I vote for. I'm to apologize for my privately held political views. I'm to apologize for the contents of my mind. And it's like, it's never going to happen for 2 reasons. Number one, I would never consider it. And number 2, even if I was idiotic enough to consider it, 99 chances out of 100 to just laugh in my face. I just humiliated myself. They would own me from that point on. And that's not going to happen. Lemuel Eubanks, I believe one time you mentioned you're not a fan of Azrael Jean-Paul Valley. Why is that? And what changes would you make to the character if you were to write him? Also, did you know that evidently Bane has a daughter named Vengeance? Well, there's a lot of imagination put into that name. I never said I wasn't a fan of Jean-Paul Valley. I don't like him as a character. But the point is, I'm not alone. You weren't supposed to like this guy. He was a narcissistic, self-centered wacko. You know, he was a real a-hole. And you weren't supposed to like him. That was the whole point of Nightfall, is that Bruce Wayne makes a poor choice in replacement as Batman, and all goes to hell. So you weren't supposed to ever like him. Even Denny O'Neil, who created him, you know, he's such a Denny character. Would insist, no, you're not supposed to like this guy. Denny didn't like him. So it's not about him being likable. I mean, I was a fan of the character. Denny created a hell of a character for us to play with. But he's a big jerk, and he was meant to be that. As far as Bane having a daughter, well, they're going to do whatever they want. And good luck to you as your continuity goes on, and you're stuck with Bane having a daughter for the rest of your continuity. We see what a wrecking ball Batman having a child did to their continuity. Let Bane have 100 kids. Let it be the Baney bunch. Oh. Alex Richmond. First off, in the introductory section for Batman Adventures Omnibus, I got to pick one of them up. Kelly Puckett states that he and many other DC writers were envious of the animated series depiction of Batman, as that Batman was more iconoclastic and was also unmarred from overly expansive continuity and canon. Puckett states that he was excited to get to work on a book adapted from that TV show. Reportedly, Scott Peterson relished in restricting Puckett to around 4 or less panels per page, and was amazed at the results, recalling that many notable comic book writers complimented Puckett's work on that adaptation for being some of the best comic book storytelling going on at the time. What did you think of the Batman Adventures book at the time, and Kelly Puckett's work more broadly? Kelly, first of all, working on the guys in the animated series, man, they had it made. They could pick and choose and cherry pick through Batman's entire continuity for stories, characters, relationships, plots, action sequences, traps, and mysteries, and all the rest of it. I mean, they just were kids in a toy shop, and that's the way they acted. I mean, very, very enthusiastic. And, you've seen the series, very, very true to everything about Batman. So, yeah, they were lucky guys. They got to play in the toy box with no restrictions. It didn't matter if it was a school night. They could stay up late messing around with Batman's toys. Now, as far as my opinion of Kelly, no one holds a higher opinion of Kelly Puckett than myself. Just a tremendous talent. Everything he wrote was terrific. I wish he was more prolific, but maybe if he were more prolific, his stuff wouldn't be as amazing as it is. And yes, his work on Batman Adventures was some of the best stuff being published at the time. Ostensibly this comic was supposed to be for children, but it was never written that way. It was never presented that way. And I look forward every month to the box of comps that would come with Kelly Puckett working with the late Mike Parabek. They were doing amazing work. And Scott Peterson wisely, probably because Kelly wasn't terribly prolific, that's probably why he limited him to the number of panels per page, so you get the scripts done faster. But it paid off. I mean, for cinematic storytelling and all the rest. He did just an amazing job. And it was a great time because there was so much synergy. I hate the word synergy, but it's accurate here, between the DC Comics office, the Bat offices, and the animation guys, Bruce Timm and Paul Dini. They were like collaborators with us because, we're heading into Nightfall and all this stuff, and a period where Batman was extraordinarily popular in the comics as well as on TV. And they would visit the offices, particularly Paul, visit the offices quite a bit. So we got to hang out with them, and they shared our view of the character, and they were diligent in presenting Batman in his truest form. So yeah, very cool. And cool that they used Bane, not once, but a couple of times in the various animated series. And the only times that anybody's ever gotten Bane right. So, what? Twin spin. Alex Richmond. Again, one of my favorite episodes of the animated series is an episode from the 3rd season called A Bullet for Bullock, which won the series an Emmy Award for musical direction, which I didn't know until I read your question. I know nobody ever told me that. Okay, anyway, I was back to Alex's missive. I was recently astonished and pleased to find the episode was adapted from an issue you wrote in Detective Comics. In the opening title, you are not given a writer's credit. What did you think of the adaptation, and why were you, to the best of my knowledge, uncredited? No, I didn't receive any credits. I think it says in the end credits that it was adapted from a story by me. Maybe it doesn't. I've never checked the credits. I'm not a member of the Writers Guild. And at this point, if you weren't a member of the Writers Guild, you weren't a person. You didn't exist. I mean, in filmed entertainment, it didn't matter who the hell you were or what your contribution was. Your name didn't get in the front credits. And yes, it's adapted from an issue of Detective Comics by me and Graham Nolan. It was written to be a one-shot. story. If you don't know the story, I won't spoil the ending, but someone's out to kill Bullock, and there's plenty of suspects. And he's trying to figure out who wants him dead. And of course, Batman has an interest in not having Harvey Bullock be dead, and so jumps in to help him out. And it's one of those uncomfortable buddy comedy, buddy cop stories where Bullock doesn't want Batman's help, but can't really turn it down. And Batman, of course, doesn't hold Harvey in very high regard. What I was flattered by, and Graham was as well, is how close an adaptation of our story this was. The only thing they added a subplot because our story wasn't long enough for a 30-minute episode, being a 22-page comic book story. So they added a subplot with a gangster that they based on Lee Marvin, which I just thought was the coolest thing ever. But yeah, I didn't get credit because I wasn't in the Writers Guild. I'm not a member of the club. Maybe I will someday, or maybe I'll just tell them no if they come knocking. After all this time, after all this writing, I'm not in the Writers Guild. I don't qualify. Chris Henderson, what are your thoughts on Amazon's Rings of Power? Well, I think Batman sums it up. What can I say about this horrible series that hasn't already been said? It's a travesty. It is. I predicted this would be the high watermark of woke entertainment, and I'm right. The reaction to this ridiculous whatever this is, I can't even call it a pastiche. This abortion, the fan reaction globally was so visceral and so hateful and so outraged, true outrage. If you're a Tolkien fan, this is a slap in the face. They spent a fortune on it, and it's dull. It looks dull. It looks uninspired. It looks cheap in a lot of scenes. For the billions they spent on this series, it looks cheap and tawdry and shoestring and ill-conceived. And the other problem, they go on and on about a diverse cast. Well, if you really, really wanted a diverse cast, which didn't make any sense at all, there were other ways to make the cast diverse other than just simply gender swapping characters and race swapping characters. There was a way to more cleverly do it. But if you wanted an ethnically, racially diverse cast, couldn't you have picked people more interesting? Aren't there more interesting performers? You look at pictures from this show, and they look like they're cosplaying. They're mid-scene, and there's no emotion. There's nothing to read. There's nothing to relate to here. This thing is just dead on arrival. I don't know if they release a second season or they're just teasing us that they might do one, but I mean, Amazon's got endless buckets of money. They don't care that this wasn't popular. Because that they don't make most of their money off of these streaming things. They don't live or die like the other streaming services do on the popularity of their stuff. And plus, they've got things like Jack Reacher and Terminal List and things like that to buoy up their subscriber base. But if you're like me, the only reason you can watch Amazon Prime, or you do watch Amazon Prime when you do, is because you wanted free shipping on your Amazon stuff. I didn't want Amazon streaming, but I got it. So, I'll take a look every once in a while if there's something I want to see. But this is not one of them. This is just awful. And there's really nothing else I can add that hasn't been said a million times. There's been a bazillion videos launched about, there's whole YouTube channels about how awful this is. Don Perkage, how would you handle a Submariner and Aquaman crossover? What did you think about Aquaman's hook in the 90s? Well, once again, it's a short answer, and then Namor provides it. This would be the only crossover miniseries that only ran one issue. The only interesting thing I think they've ever done, the hook was a dopey idea. The only interesting thing how would you swim? How do you swim with a hook? The only interesting idea I think that's ever been put forward for Aquaman was on the Brave and the Bold series, where they turned him into a dilettante, a showboat, narcissistic, egotistic, jackass. And for all of that, he was endearing. He was lovable. I really liked him. He was interesting for the first time. And I think they should have passed that over into the comics instead of him being the, not to, I don't mean this as a play on words, but the wet blanket that he's always been in the DC universe. Wayne Vogt, how tall are you? I'm tall. I'm 6'3" and a quarter. Shot up in height between the ages of 19 and 20, which was painful. I was 6 feet tall when I graduated high school. And when I went to the doctors when I was 20, you've grown 3 inches. Like, holy crap, that hurt. And my oldest son is the same height as me, and my youngest is 6'5". So, but my wife is very tall as well. So we tower over everyone we meet. But like all tall people, I don't notice it. I don't notice other people's heights because I don't have to. Although I will say, boy, Adam Baldwin is a really tall guy. I can say that as a 6'3" guy, that Adam Baldwin's really tall. I was in an elevator with him once, and I had to look up to him. So just, I don't know what they do in movies and TV to make him not look quite as big as he is, but that's a big dude. Hey, if you have questions, suggestions, if you want to know any other of my body measurements, possibly with the idea of buying me clothing, please ask. And but you can ask most directly, most reliably at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com is the best way to reach me. Most of the questions here, I think all the questions. No, some of these questions came from Facebook, but most of these questions that appear on this channel come through brunobookstore@gmail.com. And that's it for me. Thanks for looking. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for likes and subscribing and all the rest. And I'll see all of you, hopefully, down the road.